Hello, everyone. We've got a really powerful conversation here this evening. But before we get started, I'd like to welcome our panelist, John, to the screen to open us up with a prayer.
Okay. Ahi abik agot nashta, shirish nizis azinshli. The jinhi sao hira wanankai. Had enyaral tidihi, bless arosidoleth. Ahia. Creator, we come to you and we thank you because we are all your children. We come together today and talk about our struggles, our trials, and our tribulations, the mountains that we've climbed and we succeeded to overcome. We've moved mountains ourselves, Creator. We thank you so much for all these things that you have given us. Oh, Creator, in our hearts, sometimes we struggle. We feel the sadness, the pain, the hurt. We ask that you will come into our lives today and thereafter and relieve those pains and suffering. We ask this, that you will be with us and guide us on our journey in this path to heal ourselves, to heal others, to help one another, especially through this pandemic where we sit alone and we think too much and we struggle with just our daily lives. Getting up is so hard for some of us, but we come to you. Let us not forget that you are there walking with us, walking in beauty, walking with our prayers. We ask that you will continue to be with our bodies, our mind, our spirit. Let us think good thoughts. Let us see good things. Let us hear good things. Let us speak good things. Let us taste and smell good things. All these things that we take for granted sometimes, especially our little walks that we take. All these little things like touching and speaking to one another. May it all be good and may we come together. I hear agot nan. Aibu wa arishni kushi ati he kushi okan he sao hira wara sedonet. I hear agot nan shita.
Oh,
Thank you.
Beautiful. Takwiriyasan. Thank you so much. So, like I said, my name is Michaela Madrid, and I am on staff here with the Sovereign Bodies Institute. I'm also a member of the Lower Brule Lakota Sioux tribe. Today, we have a really powerful conversation called Breaking the Silence, LGBTQ2 Survivors of Violence. So, with that, I'd like to pass it over to our moderator for the evening, Lenny Hayes.
good evening, everyone. My name is Tukamwanahi Luta, which means Redstone Ghost. I am from the Assistant Wapitan Oyate of the northeast corner of South Dakota. I am the Missing and Murdered Two-Spirit Project Assistant for SBI. I am so happy tonight that we are having a conversation with some powerful, powerful individuals, and am very happy that they have agreed to be here tonight. One of the ultimate goals of having this panel discussion is that we want to break the silence of violence that occurs within our community and really encouraging our Two-Spirit people to find what they need to help themselves heal, and to become, one of those trail runners that really wants to make a lot of changes in our community, because we know that violence really impacts our community. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. First, we'll start out with Jessica, and then Alea, and then John. What I'd like you to do is say who you are, your tribal affiliation, where are you located, and how do you identify? And if you prefer to use pronouns, which ones?
Bonjour, Giriga Indigenous. My name is Jessica. I am a Two-Spirit member of the Boys Fort Band of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. I identify as a Two-Spirit bisexual woman, and I typically use she, her pronouns. Some people say they, them. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm not offended by anything with that has to deal with pronouns. I'm a survivor of human trafficking, domestic abuse, and sexual assault.
Thank you, Jessica. Leia.
First but foremost, I'd like to acknowledge my spirit name, she who collects the medicine for the people and she who works from the heart for the people. I come from the Lynx clan. My name is Alea McIver. I originate from the lands of the Treaty 1 territory in Manitoba. I originate from a First Nations community called Sandy Bay Ojibwe First Nations. It's on the shorelines of Lake Manitoba, approximately 186 kilometers northwest on Lake Manitoba shorelines, which is 186 kilometers from Winnipeg, which is our capital here in Manitoba. I come from Canada. Tonight, I'm very honored and humbled to be a part of this discussion, this very important discussion within our country, within our tribes. It's important to have this discussion and to educate our LGBTQ folk. I identify myself as a trans Indigenous woman, and my pronouns are her, she, equa.
Thank you, Alea. John.
Agote John Sneezy Gunse, San Carlos and Enchli, Stan Ienchli, Teskitten Baninchti. Ahia Ekodan Kai. Hi, my name is John Sneezy. I'm from the San Carlos Apache tribe. My clans are Istanaya, which means cottonwood in the water. We are a water clan. On my mother's side, that's who I represent, but I follow also my dad's clan, which is a rock clan, pile of rocks. So I flow like water, but I'm hard like a rock, eh?
All right, everyone. Thank you for that.
And what I did say at the end was thank you all for those who are joining us today. So.
Thank you, John. All right, everyone. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to be asking all the panelists a question. And I'm probably, it's important to, so it's 4:25. Give about 10 minutes to basically talk about your thoughts about this question if you would like. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, what can you tell us about what you may have heard about the many different forms of violence that occurs within our Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ community? So again, what can you tell us about what you may have heard about the many different forms of violence that occurs within our Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ community? So what I'm going to do is I will open it up to any of the panelists to begin. And I'll give you each, 10 minutes, but if you don't fill that 10 minutes, that's fine too. So anyone else, anyone would like to start it out, please do.
Well, for me, I think I'm the oldest of this panel, so a lot of the violence really dates back to the 70s and 80s for myself. So I come from a generations where it was really rough for all of us, and there was so much violence, both physically, mentally, verbally, in many different shapes or forms. But also on the aspect of, especially in the sexual sense, and the fact that when people drank a lot, you may not think it's violence, but it's a type of abuse, I should say, when gay people were at a party and say, like a straight male, for instance, or a straight woman would their sexual desires would be so intense that they would sort of pick on the gay people, and get their relief, so to speak, relief from there. I mean, that's one of the abuses that I've constantly heard a lot whenever I grew up, and actually seeing it with my own eyes. I've seen so much abuse and violence take place, not just on my reservation, but in the town that I grew up, where I went to grade school and high school. Um, and so it kind of, for me being a Two-Spirit LGBTQ person, a human being, I was really always on my guard. I always made sure I was around certain people that I could trust. And for the most part, the certain people that I did trust were mostly women. So a lot of the abuse that you hear, it could be many different types of abuse. Also, in the fact of certain gender roles too. They would, um, how would you say it? They would take advantage, within the gender roles in the sense of because there was no females, um, they made the gay person do a lot of the women roles. You know what I mean? Um, and only because I don't know if it was because they were lazy, or didn't want to do it or didn't know how to do it for that fact. So there was, I think for the most part, the LGBTQ community go through so much. Um, I'm not going to say trauma because it wasn't trauma, but a lot of unnecessary responsibility would be a better way to put it. So, um, but there is just so much that I have seen in my lifetime that I feel um, it does need to be heard. Um, Expression, especially for LGBTQ people, the expression that we are denied. Many people think, oh, it's going to be a sexual expression or it's going to be a non-conservative expression, which is totally false because I have goals and I have dreams and I have um, needs just like everybody else, and they're not just sexual. They're going to school, they're succeeding in life, they're becoming a better parent if one chooses to be a parent. You know what I mean? So that's also a form of abuse I feel within the LGBTQ Two-Spirit community, is that we're not given the proper voice, only because of who we are. So
Mhm.
that's my take on that question.
Thanks, John.
Mhm.
Alea or Jessica?
Hello, everyone. So many forms of violence. As a transgendered Indigenous woman whom is very vocal and instrumental in change in the province of Manitoba and the country of Canada, I've come personally in contact with lots of violence, but I don't let the violence define who I am as an Indigenous transgendered woman. I put up the challenge and go along with that challenge and execute that challenge with a better understanding from both parties, where we can learn from each other. But first but foremost, violence comes in all forms, whether that's family violence, community violence, institutional violence. Institutional violence is it could take a lot out of an individual. I faced a lot of institutional violence in different formalities, whether that's government, whether that's institutions that are incarcerating our GLBTQ2S communities. I just want to bring you to an incident that occurred probably approximately 2 years ago when we talk about violence. Okay, I was identified as, sorry, just 1 second. I was identified as an influencer in Canada on 100 and 100, or one of 150 women making a difference within Canada federally. And they brought 150 women together, and predominantly probably 98% of those women were white, and the other 3% were Indigenous. And I was the only Indigenous transgendered female that was in that group of 150 women. And because I stood up, and when I stood up, our Indigenous sister stood up behind me alongside of me in drawing attention to an issue that they weren't familiarized with when talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So I stood up and made a stance in front of these 100 and something white women. And the repercussions of that was from the federal government was I was removed because I had a voice and I spoke, and that was just a form of violence, and the violence perpetuated from institutions directly to marginalized population that don't really have a voice. But I didn't let that define who I was. I still continued on moving and navigating on gender-based violence and violence all around. And violence in our communities is very rapid, whether that's lateral violence, whether that's violence perpetuated through family, community violence could really take a toll on an individual's well-being. For myself personally, violence was directed to me from the GLBTQ community here in Manitoba, and still is directed towards me. Don't get me wrong, but I don't let that define who I am. I still continue on that heart medicine work that needs to be continued on in formats of that community finally understanding the true meaning of violence and the repercussions that it has on one's ability, but continuing to champion that ability moving forward for their understanding.
Thank you, Alea. Thank you so much. You have such a powerful voice. Thank you. Jessica.
Yeah, I think that there, are so many different forms of violence against Native LGBTQ and Two-Spirit people. And like, for me, a lot of that has been, through relationships with women, and then, like being coerced into human trafficking, which was, I think it was ultimately because I was a bisexual. And so that made me, a bigger target for my trafficker, because it's easier for someone who's bisexual to, get involved in that type of situation. And I apologize for having my video off today. I usually don't have my video off on webinars, but talking about the issue of trafficking, last night I was re-traumatized. I tried to reactivate one of my old Facebook pages to get some pictures off from my dogs that my dog that we just had to put down. And I went to go download some pictures and then permanently delete the page, and I got locked out of it. On the page was all of the stuff that happened and all of the pictures surrounding the time when I was being trafficked. There were a lot of sexually exploitive pictures on there of me, and I stayed up most of the night trying to report it and trying to get back into Facebook to get that page taken down. So I'm very tired and I'm very re-traumatized just having to see all that. I forgot about that page, and I didn't realize how much of my trafficking, situation and stories and pictures were on that page. So it dug up a lot of that trauma and those feelings that I've been trying to sit with that pain today. So I do have my video off for that reason. Another way that I think, Two-Spirit people experience violence is by our own people, and, not being accepted as a Two-Spirit person in ceremony. Myself as a Two-Spirit woman, I'm not accepted as a firekeeper. When, I am a firekeeper. I held my dad's fire when he passed away for 4 days all by myself. But if somebody in my community passes away and they ask for firekeepers, they're only asking for men, and they're not honoring Two-Spirit people who who are firekeepers. So excluding Two-Spirit people out of ceremony and out of traditional spaces is a form of violence. And then another form of violence is, excuse me, with our Two-Spirit and our LGBTQ youth who, you know, have a hard time in the school system by either getting bullied, not being able to fully express themselves because of being bullied, and then not having those support systems and spaces within the schools, you know, not having LGBTQ specific counselors or safe spaces for Two-Spirit LGBTQ students to go when they're feeling like they're being bullied. You know, I have Two-Spirit family who were bullied throughout their whole school, their whole time they went to school. And even now, like, I have family who have been in relationships and abusive relationships, and because kind of that multi-generational violence within our family, it's to them it's normal. And I think that's something that we really need to work on collectively, not only as my family but as an entire community, to really help, you know, make it people aware that these types of things are not okay, and we need to be supportive of especially our youth and our vulnerable people, you know, people who are depressed or, you know, having a hard time right now, you know, like myself. I'm vulnerable right now. I will admit that I'm very vulnerable right now because I was re-triggered last night by seeing all of that. But for me, it's being able to talk about it and breaking that silence and, you know, getting those feelings out is what is important in healing for me. So that's why it was important for me to get onto this webinar tonight, even though I do not have my video on. I want to apologize for that.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for your powerful words. So does anybody else have any like further thoughts that they would like to add to what you've already said?
For me, after, you know, thinking about this, sitting here thinking about it, we must not forget too that even in our own community, the LGBTQ Two-Spirit, we sometimes are being violated by our own community in ways of through speaking badly of each other. That's, to me, that's a form of violence. It may not be physical violence, but it's mental violence. You know, there's people out there that just out of because of envy or jealousy, they'll lie about you. They'll say things about you. Like, for instance, it was brought to my attention that somebody in the community was talking about me, calling me a hoe, saying that I was a big hoe on the reservation. And you know, I don't even go out. I stay with my mom for a whole year and a half. I've almost 2 years now. My dad had surgery, so I stay home. I don't go anywhere. And it did bother me, not because they were talking about me, but because other people were believing it. And so, you know, to me, you know, the words those are violent words, you know, that our own support group that we're supposed to have, because there's nobody else that sometimes we can't confide in, you know, for them to violate that trust that we're trying to get and that we're trying to help one another. And then they say these things, you know what I mean? So, you know, we must not get stuff like that, because, you know, when I first started Two-Spirit dancing, I did it in my own home turf at Apache Gold Casino. That was the first time I ever did it, besides doing it at Bates. And then I did it at Gathering of Nations that same year, which was 2 years ago now. And I did get backlash from a lot of the straight dancers. And well, not a lot of them, I should say, just a few here and there. They said their piece or whatever they want to. And so, you know, for me, I don't hold back. Whenever somebody tries to put me down, I will go up to them and I'll tell them. And so I went to this traditional dancer that tried to put me down, and I said, you know what? Let me tell you something. I said, I don't know why you're saying that about me. I said, because you putting me down here and passing judgment on me, I said, they do that to you at Walmart. And I said, it sucks, huh? And I said, so you can try and do it here. I said, but when you go out there, you remember you're in the same level as I am, you know? So I think for the most part, you know, we mustn't forget that, you know, just like Jessica said and Alea said, we do get it in our communities, our own home communities, we don't get the support. And I think that's one of the most traumatic things in our life, because here our community still, after all these years, after the occupations and everything, we're still being, um, there's still racism, there's still prejudice. And here there's some people on our reservation that take that side, that actually practice that. And it's just beyond me. And, you know, like I said, I'm vocal. So I have to tell people, look at, you are telling me this, you are putting me down, you are bringing me down to this level. Take a look at yourself when you step off the reservation. You're in the same boat. Nobody likes you, just like you don't like me. You know, I have to be vocal that way. And I know sometimes it may sound mean, but I speak the truth. And I think a lot of people don't want to hear the truth. That's where the violence comes. And you know, it may be the truth of themselves, of who they are. You know, I've met a lot of so-called straight men who claim to be straight, but then, you know, they ask to do things. And I'm just like, well, wait, you have kids. What's going on with you? You know? So I think there's a lot of we put a lot of barriers up, both the straight community and the LGBTQ community. We don't honor ourselves, we don't respect ourselves, and we don't love ourselves. And that's where a lot of the violence comes from, is because we don't know how to do those things. So, you know, and I, you know, you asked about pronouns. For me, I am so comfortable if somebody wants to call me girlfriend, boyfriend, bud, dude, you know, grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle. If they do it in respect, I'm okay with it. But if somebody, you know, tends to try and make fun, you know, and I'm just, I don't really have to say anything. I just got to give them my look and, you know, and move on. So I think a lot of people have a hard time with discovering who they are, and they're afraid of um, being who they are. And so when you keep that in, I think it causes more violence, because that's how I was. When I kept a lot in, I was attacked physically and physically, mentally, and sexually, because I was so vulnerable when I was young. But now that I'm older, you know, I have that willpower to say, hey, you got to take a step back. You know, you're in my no square. You get away from me. You know what I mean? So there's just a lot of healing that needs to be done. And it's good that this panel is coming, you know, that we are coming together to bring this to not just our reservations, but the whole world. You know, I mean, I've invited my friends from different countries to come and view this, and hopefully they do show up. You know, hopefully they do get a taste of what we go through and, you know, how we heal ourselves. So that's just what I have to say.
Thank you, John.
Sorry, just to add in to the conversation and the collective of the conversation, I think when we talk about violence, you know, we forget about a certain population that is being perpetuated with that violence, is that sexual violence, right? I think that's one of the biggest conversations that needs to be had. Therefore, we need to start giving opportunity and space to those whom are being victimized to sexual violence, you know, in creating a safe space for them to come forward and making them feel a part of, rather than not being a part of the conversation and the dialogue. I think that's one of the important subjects that we need to kind of touch on tonight. Therefore, there's a large population that don't feel a part of a group or a conversation and feel excluded from it. Therefore, it doesn't really resonate with their feelings, their being. So when I talk about sexual violence comes in all forms and formalities, whether that's sexual violence, violence that is being perpetuated on them while living their life to their fullest, in any capacity, whether that's being street-based and or just in different areas of life. I think it's important to create a space for them to be a part of the conversation also, moving forward. And that's a form of breaking the silence, because though that population that we are speaking on behalf of could actually teach us a lot, and that's one of the things deep in my heart that I try and include in the dialogue, in the discussion here in Canada, that we always have an opportunity to learn something new, and by learning something new is by opening the platform to different populations that we can learn from, because everything's changing consistently within our daily lives, that everything's changing from where we left off our lives at that point in time to where we're at today. So yeah, that's what I would like to add in. Thanks.
Thank you, Leah. Jessica, did you have any follow-up thoughts?
Yeah, I think a big part of violence against Native LGBTQ Two-Spirit people also is the lateral violence that we experience online, different formats and different things, like, even if we just go on to like a news media post and it has something to do with LGBTQ, and there's so much hate, there's so many people that have hateful things to say. Recently, the city of Duluth, where I live by, they're forming a LGBTQ board, to be able to include this population, in their city meetings and whatnot. They have all kinds of different boards, but on the post, when they announced this board, there were so many hateful comments, and to me that just proved the need for that board. Like, people are so visually out there with their hate and their bias. And I had said something, because the name of their board was like really a lot of letters. I know, like, the acronyms that people add on to it all the time, and it gets really big sometimes. So all I said was, can it just be LGBTQ2 plus? That would be easier, because I think they had like 10 different letters. And somebody commented back at me and told me to pick a lane. And like, that type of thing, like, when you're coming at somebody like that online, to me that shows, one, weakness, because for you to bring down somebody who is in a place of power, or that is strong enough to speak about being LGBTQ Two-Spirit and the violence and all the things that happen in this community, that backlash and that hate from the community is a real problem, and it is a form of violence, lateral violence. And even within our own Native community, that lateral violence that we see, there's I don't remember where it was, but the chairman kind of came out and as Two-Spirit, and they received a lot of lateral violence and hateful comments online. So that's another really huge form of violence that not a lot of people really understand and talk about. I think that, you know, we need to start addressing those issues with not only our community, but our own people that are perpetrating this violence and these hateful comments against us.
Mhm. Thank you, Jessica. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share? All right, so I'm just going to comment a little bit about what you all said, and I totally agree with everything that you all have said about the violence that that we experience not only within our own communities but our own tribal communities. And I'm glad that you really talked a little, Jessica, about this, about spiritual violence. We know that a lot of our Two-Spirit people who live in rural communities are often shunned from going into ceremony. I've always talked about the spiritual violence is that a lot of our Two-Spirit people aren't allowed to be a part of ceremony. And I always talk about, some of my Two-Spirit friends from South Dakota who would sometimes travel to Minnesota just to go into the sweat lodge, just to be in ceremony. And we know that our Two-Spirit people, Native LGBTQ people, played a huge part in ceremony before colonization. So, to have that taken away from us, and also our identity, being stripped, really causes a lot of impact and pain on an individual. So if anyone doesn't have any comments, I'm going to move into the next question, which I believe a couple of you touched on it a little bit, but I would like us to go into a deeper conversation. So the next question that I would like to ask you all is, in your opinion, why do you think it's so difficult for our Two-Spirit people to report violence? So again, I'll repeat that question. In your opinion, why do you think it is so difficult for our Two-Spirit people to report violence that's either perpetrated on themselves or maybe on a friend, or even just specifically talking about community? So whoever wants to go first, please do.
I can go first.
Okay.
I think a lot of that has to do with fear and shame, and that fear of that backlash and that recurring lateral violence when somebody speaks about it or reports. And also, like just not feeling safe. And like it depends on if this person is scared to report it to just like their family, or if they're reporting it to law enforcement, because there can be a big difference there, I think, especially with the justice system and the law enforcement. There are no protections in place for LGBTQ2 spirit people, so that is a huge barrier. And Lenny, that you and I, that's something that we have worked on together in the agency in California. So I think that's a huge issue, just not only here, but all across the country. So I think it's, these safety nets that are not put in place that are really a huge barrier for people to report violence. And also I think, like when it is reported, it's often shut down, and or it's not believed, or like even with my situation last night, I reported my page that was really sexually exploitive towards me and or of me. And I reported it to Facebook as under sex trafficking, and I reported a bunch of photos for like sexual exploitation and nudity, which, because I mean, I wasn't fully nude, but there were a lot that were very revealing, and it was very difficult for me to see because I was mentally in a really bad spot with my mental health at that time. So I didn't really remember all of that, and seeing that was traumatic. But Facebook told me it was not against their community standards.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think, like just having those types of shutdowns, not like, even when if you report somebody's comment that's hateful towards you on a Facebook thread or something, and you always get that response, this doesn't go against our community standards. But then, I have people and friends who are constantly being banned from their page and are put into quotes Facebook jail for, calling out like racist people and say, so I feel like even Facebook itself, it has a lot of racist it worked into their protocols, and whoever is deciding whether or not this violates community standards or not, I think that they need to have more of a diverse staff or something, because clearly something is really wrong with their reporting system, and it just exasperates violence against our people.
Anyone else want to share their thoughts?
Sorry, what was the question again?
So the question is, in your opinion, why do you think it's difficult for our Two-Spirit people to report violence, which either can be perpetrated on themselves or community or, friends?
Again, when we talk about that piece, it's the lack of the social service net that's currently in play for those whom feel comfortable and or feel that strength in coming forward. There isn't no safety protocol around prior, before, and after when individuals come forward with any forms of violence. Therefore, there's a lack of service, put in play to help in the duration of that healing module that should be in play for victims that are coming forward with violence perpetuated against them or the community at large. When we talk about that piece, we need to really look at, where we're at in today's life, where in 2020, things have really changed drastically through this global pandemic, and that we need to really look at our policies within our agencies, within our jurisdictions, within our social service net, and really reflect them back onto the community that's being served and the community that's, coming to those, agencies seeking some sort of, service. Again, there's a lack of, will from justice, right? Justice plays a big part in moving in the direction of, helping a victim move from those stages of victim to warrior to survivor, or victim survivor to warrior. Sorry. Justice has a big play in that, and moving those formats, those folk into different categories. Therefore, if they're not going to service them with the proper services that they need at that time, they're keeping them in that victimization stage, and where they're continuously helping perpetuate violence towards them. But if they start really putting services in play that are going to help them move from those stages, then we can see our GLBTQ community strive in understanding what violence is and how violence is perpetuated against them, and how they can break that silence on violence, and violence may come in different forms, and violence really leads to the missing and murdered of Indigenous GLBTQ folk. So, being being one of those friends and family members directly impacted to that, I think it's important to address that piece also, because that's what it leads to eventually. That, you know, us all over the world really need to champion that and really, you know, really make strong stances when you know, service delivering that population of folk. So I'll leave it off at that and I'll let other people join in the conversation.
Thank you, Alea.
So what I want to touch a little bit on of why I feel that a lot of people don't report or don't say anything is because it's been a cycle since since it began back in you know, in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s. And when I say it's a cycle, I'm talking about, you know, as Native people, you know, we're taught to joke with each other. Joking is a sign of acceptance. But sometimes the joking turns into ridiculing, and then it goes into bashing. And I'm going to tell you a story about one of my grandfathers. So back in the 60s or 70s, he was a straight man. He ended up having girlfriends and whatnot. Well, he ended up getting an STD. And back then, you didn't talk about those things because once people found out, they talked about you. And so they were always told anytime anybody were to get these things, you don't say anything, you don't talk about it, you keep it to yourself, or everyone's going to laugh at you, everyone's going to put you down. And so they were told not to talk about it. So my grandfather, it was actually my grandmother's brother, he ended up contracting this STD. And what he did was he went to the store to go get the medication for it. Well, he thought he was going to go into the store without anybody noticing, and there just happened to be two other reservation people in that store. And so once they found out, they didn't approach him. What they did was they started telling everybody. So they started, you know, gossiping basically. And so this is the cycle. It's always been a cycle. You don't want people to know these things. You don't want people that you've been abused, especially sexually abused, because people already think, well, maybe he was like this, maybe she was that way, maybe that's way. So people keep them inside. People keep it inside themselves. The other thing that plays a big factor, especially now, is that so many of our reservation people are on drugs and alcohol, especially meth. And the stories that I've hear about what goes on, you know, even I don't know if you guys remember the HBO series Showtime Queer as Folk, when there was a one time where, you know, it had to deal with meth, and then the man got just tossed around because he was on meth, you know, just stories like that. You hear all these things, and people don't want to come out because they're afraid of being talked about. Nobody wants to be talked about in a bad way. You know, I don't care how strong you think you are, but nobody doesn't like that. People say, "Oh, I've gone through it. I know what's happening," but deep down in your mind, it still bothers you. I mean, even now, little things, you know, it bothers me. What, you know, not so much what people say because I know it's not true, but like I said, I work in the community in the healthcare field, and when people hear these things, what do they think of me? So it kind of makes me feel bad that other people would actually believe these things. And so I think that's the stigma of um, sexual abuse, sexual violence, or any kind of violence on our reservation. Um, you know, and with that, um, um, like parents who were partying, who were doing drugs, and then their kids end up getting sexually abused or physically abused. You know, that is traumatic in a sense, because they probably think, I should have been there. How could I have not been there? What did I do? How, why did I do it? And it's always I. They don't think about their child. So in a small community like the reservation communities that we have, you're put in, you live in a fishbowl. Even the next town over where I grew up, I lived in a fishbowl there, So you're always in a small community, you're always having somebody constantly look at you and passing judgment. You know what I mean? So it's scary. It's really scary to say, hey, you know what? This is what happened to me. This is what a family member did to me. This is what my friend's dad did to me, or something like that. You know what I mean? There could be many situations with sexual abuse. And you don't know what the backlash is. That's what comes into your mind, is you don't know what the backlash is. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how could it affect your life, in the future. Is it going to be bad? Is it going to be good? So all these things come in, and so it strains a person's mind, and then therefore they back down from it. And then they say, no, I don't want it. I don't want that. I just leave it. That's their thinking. That's a person's thinking. That was my thinking. And I was always told, that don't say anything. Just don't say anything, or else they're going to start drinking again, or else they're going to do this again. So more negative was put on a situation that I went through. And so the more negative I thought about it, I didn't want it. I didn't want to be a part of it. And so I let it slide and I let it go. And only up until I was 22 or 23 is when I finally came clean with my family, with my parents. And I think that was the most liberating thing for me, because it took a lot for me to come out and tell people what actually was being done to me all the years, and even up until my adult years. And you know it takes a toll on you. It takes a toll on your body and your heart. But I can honestly say that I am a survivor, and I'm here telling you my story. I'm here giving you my experience so that hopefully it'll help somebody. And that's why I chose to do this discussion. And I think about my nephews and nieces, and I always tell them, you be careful. When you go to your friend's house, you be careful. You stick to yourself. You keep your hands to yourself. You don't let anybody touch you. I tell them these things, and I think it's just to help them realize that they are sacred. Our body is sacred. Our life is sacred, and it means so much, to Creator, to protect ourselves. So, um, it's and I don't mind sharing my story. I don't mind sharing my tears, because I went through that fear. I went through the hate, the anger, where I didn't want to be around people. I just hated communities. But then I left the reservation, and I saw and I met so many people, and it helped me. I mean, even the Bates Powwow, it helped me so much to further my, I guess, platform. It gave me a platform to talk more about people. And I do get people that come up to me and want to talk, and I'm open to that. And whether they call me elder, whether they call me grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle, I accept it, because they have a story to tell, and I want their story to be heard, whether it be through me or their community or their mother and father, because um, I don't want them to have that denial anymore. I want them to accept it, and I want them to move forward, and I want them to be strong. So, with that being said, all the things that I talked about, those actually happened to me because there were so many roadblocks that I couldn't express myself. I couldn't come clean with family and friends. So, so hopefully what we're talking and discussing about, I hope it helps people. I hope they reach out to people. Hope is very strong, and hope gets me through my roughest days. And my prayers get me through the days too. So that's just what I want to share. Um, you know, and I'm pretty sure the friends that are watching this or will watch this, they don't know these things about me because um, I talk about it to a selective few, um, but I'm happy to talk about it now to the world that um, not really that you're not alone, but I'm standing with you. I'm there with you. I empathize with what you go through. And if there's any way that my words can help, I hope it does. I hope. It's a strong word. So that's what I want to share.
Thank you, John. I kind of wanted to follow up with what you said, and then actually even what Jessica said, that she believes that fear and shame really prevents a lot of our individuals from our community to report the violence that is perpetrated on them. But one of the things that I remember, and I share this story because I didn't know what it was until later. But one of the things that I know of is that I had my own internalized homophobia. I remember when I came to the cities 25 years ago and I went into my first gay club. And because of all the violence that was perpetrated on me on the reservation, I didn't know that I had internalized homophobia until years later, because when I went into the club and I seen cross-dressers, or maybe they were transgender, I didn't know at the time and I didn't understand, I wasn't educated. But the first thing that I said to them was, you're the reason why gay people get picked on. That's internalized homophobia that I was carrying, that I hated myself so much that when I went into a place where I was supposed to feel safe at, I perpetrate violence on my own people. And so for me, that was something that I had to sort of heal within myself, is that hate that I had towards myself because of all the violent words that were used against me, all of the violent situations that happened to me. It really takes its toll on a person. And so I just wanted to follow up with what Jessica and John were talking about. Jessica.
Yeah, I just feel the need to kind of almost defend myself. I think when John was saying, when parents are using and children are abused, it's always I, and the child is forgotten. And, I think that subject is situational. So, I mean, for me, when I was using and my daughter was abused, it was never I put myself totally on the back burner and put my child first, and into therapy, and made sure that she was healing. And that was a big problem of how I wasn't able to heal, because I was so focused on her healing. So, I think that is a situational thing, and it can't really be a blanket term. You can't put that all into one group. Because as a mother who has experienced that with her daughter, I do blame myself, but it's not I always put her first and her healing above my own. And even that has left us out of ceremony and out of being able to go to powwows for many, many years, protecting her against her abuser. So I just wanted to follow up with that because it kind of hurt my
Thank you,
feelings.
Jessica.
Okay, and let me follow up to that, because I did not pinpoint a certain person. What I did was talking about an experience that I went through. And also, you got to remember, when we heal, the Creator gave us 2 ears to listen more than to speak. So it wasn't in a way to make anybody feel uncomfortable speaking of my experience. I listen to people, I listen to my community, I listen to a lot of people, and what I share is what I hear. So I'm sorry if it did offend you. That's totally not what I was trying to do. And it wasn't a blanket statement, so to speak. Everybody has their different situations that they go through. I had my different situations that I went through, totally different than yours and totally different than Alea and Lenny. And I think we still have to honor that. We can't do that as a community, especially in the LGBT community. We can't say, well, you're wrong for saying that, and I'm right for saying this. You can't do that. You got to let people speak. And that's the reason why I say it's hard for people to acknowledge their abuse and to say that, because we're too busy saying, oh, no, you can't do that. Oh, you can't say that. You got to let people speak. And I think that's where the healing comes from. You can't judge what a person says. And I hope I make sense in that way, because my nephews talk to me and I let them talk. I don't tell them you're wrong for saying that. I don't tell them you're right for saying that. I let them speak. Up until they finish, then I will counsel them if I have to. So if you did feel offended, I'm sorry, but you got to let people speak in order for them to heal, in order for others to heal. That's just what I have to say about that.
Thank you. Well, I think it's, I think it's really important to remember that there's many reasons why our people in our community are afraid to report violence for many, many different reasons. So it's just, it's just not one thing. I think it's a combination of many other things. And the fact that we all do have our opinion, but I wanted to move on to the next question before we go into the questions from the people who are attending. So let me ask you a question. And what do you think will help our community to heal? What will help our community heal?
Sorry, I'm just going to jump into this. So, so what will help our community heal is by, first, for one, is listening, believing and understanding, and having a safe space for those who come forward. And also, moving forward is building a safety net that secures the safety of those voices, those truths, that truth telling coming in, and supporting it with a wraparound service. And with that wraparound service attached to an elder that's, is very understanding and very aware of, the occurrences with violence. And also moving forward is we need to stop shaming those whom are coming forward. I think that's one of the biggest parts. We're still in the midst of shaming those whom are coming forward, and that's one of the biggest pieces that really deteriorate people from coming forward is the slut shaming, the shaming of those voices of people coming forward, and it's echoed throughout the duration of the webinar of that. The reasoning behind it, right, is the shaming. We need to really start shifting that narrative into believing, into lifting, into walking alongside those who come forward, and really, calling out the perpetrators that are perpetuating this violence towards them, rather than shaming those whom are coming forward with the allegations and the truth, of forms of violence. I think that's one of the biggest steps moving forward, and also collaborating. The collaboration, because one individual might be in one community and the perpetrator in the same community as the victim. Therefore, we need to build a safety net of collaboration around other servicing communities that are servicing the same needs, but building a safety net of a coalition of some formality of when victims and survivors come forward to actually take them out of that community for a time being, and while they report the incident to officials, whichever whichever duration that they would like to go in, and supporting them, giving them that wraparound approach, and also bringing them back in the community where when it's safe and where it's safe, and helping them, walking alongside them, moving throughout the duration of whatever that duration may be. I think that's one of the biggest steps. And, law enforcement plays a big role in this, law enforcement in executing, proper safety protocol for victims, those whom have been victimized to a crime, and those crimes may vary through a long list of severities of any crime, right? So also having victim services workers, continuously, walking alongside them, from their stance and meeting them where they're at. I think that's one of the important pieces when working with victims, is meeting them where they're at, not where agency, a service provider wants them at, but meeting them actually where they're at on the ground, and building that rapport from there and moving forward and from their vision of what their support system looks like, and not only their support system, but there's next steps forward.
Thank you, Alea. That was powerful. Jessica or John, what do you think will help our community to heal?
For me, what really helped me heal is, and I'm really happy that I really got to enjoy a lot of my elders before this pandemic started, because I was able to go out and see them. And I think that's one thing that was really healing for me, was listening to the elders. For me, I identify as Two-Spirit. And the reason why I identify as Two-Spirit is because I'm able to balance my male and female side. I was taught how to cook and clean. I was even taught that, you feed the men first, and then you feed the ladies, and then you eat, and then I was taught how to, fix simple things in cars, work outside around the house. But one thing that was really eye-opening for me is going back and learning the traditional aspects, not so much on the gender identity, but just the everyday things that we, especially prayer, ceremony, and I know other people in this panel have talked about not being honored to go to ceremony, but, for me, I didn't have to be a part of the sweat. If they didn't want me there, I went to medicine people on my own. I did things on my own. And that's how I got my connection with the higher power. Sometimes you just got to go out and adventure. The other thing too is that in our communities, we really need our own people to go to school to become counselors, to become healers, educated healers, so to speak, because it will help us in the long run. We do have a sexual violence department on our reservation, but a lot of people, they're not community members. But on another note, when we were talking about why people won't report sexual violence and abuse, what I hear a lot on the reservation, especially work in the healthcare field, is I don't want to tell anybody on my reservation because they talk too much. So what do? They go off the reservation, so I think trying to get people to feel comfortable that you can come and talk to us. You don't have to talk to a psychologist. You can talk to your family, your friends. I think we need to bring that trust within our own families, within our own community, so that we can heal ourselves, so that we can heal each other better. We got to find a way of trusting one another, basically. You can put all kinds of programs on the reservation, all kinds of help, but when you don't build that trust and gain the trust and have trust for one another, it just doesn't go anywhere. You know what I mean? That's why I'm so, if people are openly willing to talk to me, my first reaction is to listen. And for a lot of times we don't listen to each other. We don't let people speak. We don't let people express themselves. Expression is a big part of healing. What you want, what you desire, what you need, what's bothering you. Uh, I mean, there's expression, and not having a voice is what really harms a community. And that's what I just want to give, to the people is you've got to start letting people talk. You got to start letting people open up when they want to, not forcefully getting them to open, um, that I think that comes with, I'm thinking about the discipline that I got. My parents were always saying, "What's wrong? What happened? What did you do? How come you did that?" It was always a forceful. They didn't let me explain myself. It was always, um, it was always judged, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? So I think, we just have to let people express themselves. Expression is a big key. Um, and we just don't let people do that. We don't let people be themselves. We don't let, even in our own LGBT community, we don't let them be themselves. We pass judgment. So to me, that's what I see. And I know it seems negative and there's no hope, but what the hope I'm giving is that you gotta communicate better. You gotta let people communicate with you. You gotta let people in. You can't just put up a fence around them. You got to let them speak. You know what I mean? So that's just what I have to offer.
Thank you. I think one of the important things to remember about all of this too is just really truly understanding that, a lot of us operate in many, many different ways. And in the fact that, there may be somebody who's really broken because of everything that they may have experienced and yet don't have a voice. And I do agree, that we need to listen to them, but we also need to encourage them and be there for them and create safety because there is, individuals out there who are quite broken and haven't found a place of healing yet. Um, you know, One of the things that I always say, as a mental health provider, and even just, the work that I do, one of the things that I have to say about trauma is that we need to remember that trauma impacts everyone differently. It may just take one event versus somebody who may experience trauma after trauma. Um, but the thing is, because often we hear that too also within our community and other communities, is like, oh, it wasn't that bad, or um, saying things like that is really hurtful. And so I'm always reminding people too, people that I talk with in public, people, in part of the work that I do is that for us to stop comparing trauma. And we do that really well in our communities, in all of our communities. And we need to stop doing that because that also prevents too, because, people get it in that mindset, oh, well, maybe I didn't, go through it that bad or whatever. And so that also prevents them from coming forward too. And that goes along with what Alea was saying is that shame piece. So does anyone else have anything that they would like to follow up with that question? Jessica?
I think just inclusivity too within community is a big part of that. And even
Mm-hmm.
within my own community right now, there's a lot of violence and there's a lot of conflict going on around the protesters of line 3 and people who are working, native people who are working the pipeline and then people who are protesting it. There's a lot of violence going back and forth. And I feel like there needs to be some type of like almost like a talking circle, like with ceremony for my community that is really struggling right now with this. And one of my Two-Spirit warriors who is kind of under attack by the community because of the work that they're doing against the pipeline. And, you know, it's hurtful, and it's hurtful for me to witness that, and to see all of the work that this person has done kind of get just overlooked because of this pipeline and the law enforcement that is really only protecting the pipeline and not the people. So I think, you know, for community to be so divided is a really big barrier when it comes to healing. I think we need to, as a whole and as a community, be able to sit down and work through conflict, or, you know, do conflict mediations or talking circles or ceremonies, because without that, you know, without that community piece, I think that it's really hard for anybody to heal. You know, for me especially, I need, you know, I need my support system, I need my community. So that's just one thing that I really wanted to say, was that community piece that really needs to be there for healing.
Thank you, Jessica. Yes, and I agree too about, you know, we really do need to end the lateral violence within our community, because that really does hurt us, you know. So what I'm going to do now is that we have, I'm going to open it up to the audience to see if they have any questions. And I believe we have one question coming in.
Yeah, so for those of you who are tuning in on the Facebook Live, please feel free to post any questions that you might have in the comments, and we will do our best to get to them. So we have one question asking, how can we go back to the traditional ways with upholding and fostering the sacredness of our Two-Spirit and Native LGBTQ communities?
Wow.
So would anybody like to address that question? I can repeat it one more time. So how can we go back to the traditional ways of upholding and fostering the sacredness of our Two-Spirit and Native LGBTQ communities?
So I'm going to jump into this conversation and just, answer from my point of view. I think one of the things we also didn't talk about through the duration is, you know, those thought behaviors, those colonial behaviors that we were taught and that we incorporate in our daily lives. I think when we start depicting those behaviors and those taught behaviors is when we start flourishing within our communities and start upholding our GLBTQ2S folk in our communities. And also everybody has a part to play in the duration of, you know, implementing our 7 sacred teachings, our teachings within our jurisdictions, our sentimental teachings that were taught to us from our ancestors. Therefore, we have an obligation and a duty, and it's up to each individual to implement what our ancestors, you know, displayed to our relatives, or we have an obligation to continue the colonial violence perpetuated from those white settlers that settled in our territories and developed laws without the lenses of Indigenous peoples. So by that, you know, if we're going to our ancestors' ways in our teachings, I think we would have a better outcome and a better understanding of, you know, what we're talking about today. And also to all the viewers, I just want to let you know, if you are, you know, thinking of coming forward and breaking the silence on violence, I lift you up, I walk alongside you, I believe you, I believe we all believe you, and that we want nothing but the best for you. So I'm just going to leave it off at that and let others, you know, comment.
Thank you, Alea. That was very powerful.
Okay, for one thing, when you want to go back to tradition and cultural values, we can't think of it as a group, a certain group, you know, Two-Spirit or whatnot. In language, especially when you're taught your traditional language, when you talk about your community, in my language, we say ne, which means all of us. You have to include everybody. That one word is very strong, ne, which means all of us. So you have to include everybody with your traditional cultures and values. And one thing that my grandmother and my parents and my grandfather told me was that when you go out from this house, if you want respect, you treat people the way you want to be treated. You give that respect first. That is the Apache way. When somebody comes to your house, even if it's just a cup of water, you offer them a cup of water. These little simple things, these little simple acts are what makes you a humble person. Nobody has humility anymore. You know, everybody is too busy. And, you know, I think about this pandemic that we're going through, you know, it was a teaching for everybody. It was a teaching that we needed to slow down. Everybody in this world needed to slow down. Everybody needed to come back to family. Everybody needed to come back. For us, everybody needed to come back to the reservation. Everyone needed to come back to their traditional ways and values. That, to me, was from a sign from Creator. And luckily, I thought that way and I felt that way. Um, with the Two-Spirit people, like I said, my mom taught me how to cook and clean. My dad taught me how to do boy things, taught me to take care of myself, to take care of the family, to take care, you know, of everything around you that Creator gave you. Um, so it's not, in my thinking, the way I think, it's not so much of a gender, you know, um, it's just having respect for people. I think that's what we get away from when we talk about, especially inclusion. If you want to, if you want everybody to be included, you have to have respect for each other. You have to listen to each other. You have to acknowledge each other. One thing I really have a hard time in the LGBTQ community with my friends, that I go around with, is that they really put religion, other people's religions down, other people's faith. You know, my grandmother always told me, whatever works for those people, let them have it. That's for them. You, on your other hand, I'm teaching you all these things. This is who you are. I'm not teaching you to judge people on that side. That's the way they do it. That's how they were brought up. What we teach you is going to help you. That's what we want you to learn, the Apache way. And it's okay. It's okay for them to be that way. And I think there's just so much, um, you did this. You did this to me. They did this to me. You know, that's so negative, and it affects your life and how you are going to live your life um, in the future, especially as a Two-Spirit. For me, those words that my grandmother and mother and father taught me has taken me so far. I've met so many people. I've engaged in so many communities. I've engaged in the Bates powwow community, and I appreciate them so much for welcoming me with open arms. So I think, you know, to that, how we treat people um, is how Two-Spirit people treat others is what's going to get you through your experiences, especially bad ones. So that's how I feel with that question that was being asked. So.
All right, thank you. Thank you, John. I think one of the things too that we need to remember is that in order to help our community heal also is that we need to address the issues and the violence that's impacting our community. Um, and when we continue to address those issues, then it also helps our community to come forward and to be able to talk about the things that they're experiencing. And again, always remembering that everybody's experience is different, and also to understand that a lot of our Two-Spirit people, and I will talk for myself, you know, growing up and not being a part of culture and spirituality played a huge impact in my life because I lost my identity as a Native person. And even that I didn't know the understanding of the term Two-Spirit until I was in my late 20s. And I came to the big city and heard that term. So again, I mean, just, you know, just really addressing the issues that are really impacting our community is really important. So with that, do we have any more final questions or not? Okay, so I just want to publicly say to all of the panelists, thank you from the bottom of my heart for agreeing to be a part of this conversation. Again, our conversation isn't going to solve all the problems that are occurring within our community, but my hope is that it will encourage others to have conversation and really sort of really breaking down those barriers. So with that, what I am going to do now is I'm going to ask John when he's ready to close us with one of his songs. You're on mute.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm so happy to sing this song. This song goes back a long ways. And it's just a simple song. It just talks about, walking with your prayers. Wherever I may go, may I walk in beauty, where I walk with my prayers. And it's one of my favorite songs. So with that being said, thank you, Creator, for giving us a good talk, a good discussion. May it help each and every one of us wherever we may go. May it bring light to our hearts. May it bring light to our lives. And may it help us in the future to understand each other better, to heal each other better, to heal ourselves, and to heal the next generation. With this, I sing my song. Shiokahi begoshona shanga, Shiokahi begoshona shanga, begoshona shuyo, Shiokahi begoshona shuya, Ange hagona shanga, hagona shuyo, Shiokahi begoshona shuya, Nenga Shiokahi begoshona shanga, Shiokahi begoshona shanga, begoshona shuyo, Shiokahi begoshona shanga, Ange agona shanga, agona shuyo, Shiokahi begoshona shuya, Nenga Shiokahi begoshona shanga, Shiokahi begoshona shanga, begoshona shuyo, Shiokahi begoshona shuya, Ange hagona shanga, hagona shuyo, Shiokahi begoshona shuya, ne Shiokahi begoshona shanga, Shiokahi begoshona shanga, begoshona shuyo, Shiokahi begoshona shuya, Ange hagona shanga, hagona shuyo, Shiokahi begoshona shuya, yeah.
Thank you, John. All right, Michaela, did you have anything